We just finished today's episode of Beyond the Gates. It is Tuesday, August 18th, 2026. We start off over at the country club locker room where Ted, Carlton, Smitty, Martin, and Kyle are changing after their basketball game. They won the game. I guess it was a championship, some kind of charity thing. I don't know. What we did learn is that, they reinforced that Smitty is not an athlete. He cannot play basketball, which I think they should have had him kind of get hurt, like not seriously hurt, but it would be a fun running gag since he got hurt by the 83-year-old playing pickleball, I think it was. And now, he's playing basketball. Smitty is, I guess, in his 30s, playing basketball with a bunch of guys in his 50s. He's probably the youngest of the, I mean, he and Martin might be the same age, but he might be a year or two younger than Martin. So, theoretically, he could be the youngest one of the group. And he's playing with like a bunch of 50-year-olds. And I would group Martin's like an 80-year-old mentally, so so it would just be a funny running gag that if every time Smitty plays a sport, he gets hurt, and that doesn't have to be serious. It doesn't have to be confined to the sofa or anything. It would just be a funny running gag for Smitty, because they're like those two need some levity. And we need something to chuckle at other than just laughing at them existing. Because, God, they're boring. Anyway, Andre was supposed to play, right? He was supposed to play, but he didn't. Like, he bowed out. So remember when Martin asked him to, and he said, there's going to be a bunch of cameras and all the things. And, he said, I don't think so. And then I guess at some point, and maybe it might have happened on air, but I guess at some point off air, Vernon, that Andre was going to play, but they said he bowed out. So bowed out, using the term bowed out, means that he had committed and then reneged. So anyway, we also learn that Martin is a great cook. Why don't you guys show us some of this stuff? I don't know. Like, have him and Smitty have a romantic evening where he cooks for Martin. Now, where he cooks for Smitty. I do think when after they broke up or something, Martin did because Smitty mentioned some pasta dish. So I do think that there was something where Martin did kind of cook for him, but it's been so long, and we've been in the throes of his election. So, but I do think that they need to make Martin and Smitty more interesting. They did try to do some stuff today with them as being lovey-dovey and all the things, but we need to see them just, I don't know. They're just not interesting characters. There's just, and there was a development that I'll talk about a little later with Smitty that maybe they're turning the corner with that. And it does seem like they are trying to soften and lighten Martin a little bit and make him a bit more likable, because I think that, and listen, just because they're both gay doesn't mean they have to be likable characters in terms of, they have to be the moral centers of the show or any of that stuff, but they need to be interesting. And right now, I just don't find those two characters very interesting. What would help is if they had some friends their age. And I've advocated for this before. I would love for them to have another couple, a gay black male couple, who are their friends, and we see them go out and have drinks at Uptown, and just to see a lighter side of Martin and Smitty, where they're not just hanging out. And this is honestly, for a lot of the characters on the show, where they're just not hanging out with their family, where they actually have real meaningful friendships. But I guess that is a year 3 problem at this point. So Kyle is, going to go freshen up because he's meeting with Nicole. Ted, when Kyle goes into the shower, Ted tries to, stir up some trouble with Carlton, saying, that doesn't bother you. Kyle basically throwing it in your face that he's meeting up with Nicole. And Carlton's like, no, because we ended things. I didn't like the situation. I'm an adult. I don't want to play these games. So it's done. So, and we're just going to be friends now. And Ted finally admits, he's like, well, to be honest, I wasn't really cool with you being with Nicole anyway. And there were times when I wanted to deck you. And Carlton's like, well, bring it on. If you want to, like, if you, like, I'm sitting here, if you want to, big man. And, so they basically got everything off their chest. Carlton's like, if I was meant to be with Nicole, I would have been with her before you, the whole story about how they all three met in Hawaii, but Ted did a misdirect and he was with Nicole and Carlton was like wandering around the beach looking for her. So, Carlton's kind of like, I had this idea of Nicole in my head. Basically, and we've said this before, Carlton wanted the Nicole Ted had. Carlton didn't want this new version of Nicole. And when he realized that this new version of Nicole wasn't going anywhere, he basically, while it wasn't positioned as an ultimatum, it was an ultimatum. Like, I want to be exclusive, and if you don't want to be exclusive, then I just need to end this. And Nicole was like, oh, cool, because I was already going to choose the other guy. Now, I think in Carlton's mind, and this is just a character, I'm not like writing for the character, but I think, if you're doing a character study, I think mentally Carlton thought, if I could, if she's gotten this out of her system, Naughty Nikki, out of her system, and I can get her to be exclusive with me, then I will get the old Nicole back. But what he found out was that the old Nicole wasn't coming back, or at least the old Nicole wasn't coming back to be with him. And he accepted it. To his credit, guys know I'm not a huge fan, but to Carlton's credit, he did accept it. Now, the other thing that came off in this episode, and I still don't understand why Ted is considered like a hero or a good guy, because in the locker room, Ted came off as very judgmental about Nicole and Kyle. He came off very judgmental. He had a conversation with Nicole later, and he sounded very condescending talking to her and judgmental. I just don't like this guy. And I don't know if it's just Keith's take on the character, which, listen, maybe it is. Maybe this is how we're supposed to feel about him, which is fine, because not every character has to be likable. I am fine with them giving us dynamic black characters who aren't just the salt of the earth, that they have complexity, like Bill Hamilton. They have complexity. One day you love them, one day you hate them. I've always said that Ted, especially, after the anniversary party, Ted is the villain in this story, but he has not been treated as so enough for my taste. I don't know what the original Ted's take would have been on this character if he was still in the role and it was still being written, and if it was being written like it's being written today. We don't know. But maybe it is Keith's interpretation of the character, and that's why and kudos to Keith. Like, if he has an interpretation of who this guy is, and this is who he thinks he is and the way he moves through the world, and he's like this smug, arrogant guy, that is, like, I love to see it. I love for an actor to feel so comfortable in their skin that they have a take on the character and they're just not reciting lines. We've seen that. So, again, this is not a judgment call on the performance or even the writing of the character. It's just literally my interpretation. This guy is an asshole. And it's just that he's not being treated as such by most of the characters on the show. And it's like I see him as an asshole. I'm not sure why the rest of Fairmont Crest doesn't see him as an asshole. But moving along, in the dining room, Nicole and Vanessa are having brunch. They're talking about Joey, and Vanessa reveals to Nicole that Heather exists, that Joey has a sister. Excuse me. And Nicole is surprised by that because Joey, to her, doesn't seem like the type of kid who would want to share his toys. And, Vanessa talks about how Joey keeps warning her not to get too close to Heather. And Nicole is like, well, if he's telling you that, maybe there's something to it and you should listen to him. And Here's one of my issues with Vanessa, and even Vanessa, Nicole, and Danny as friends, and the Dupris in general. And I've said this before, this is going to be new information. The Dupris are the least discerning people, especially to be of such magnificent wealth. They'll just let anybody around them, right? Hayley, June. And I'm not saying that like June should have never been, but like they just opened their arms to her without any concern of her background, that her, addiction issues, her mental health. Like, because remember, the woman was trying to pay for lunch with Monopoly money. Let's not forget that. The show has forgotten it. We haven't forgotten it. And there's not been a line of dialogue that she's been in therapy or Al-Anon. So, like, let's, whatever the Narcotics Anonymous is. Al-Anon's not the right term. But anyway, but my point is, and this isn't about a rant on June, but my point is that the Dupris just tend to just let anybody in. Eva, right? They just let anybody in, no background checks, nothing. No, like, they don't even run a basic, like any other company, you get a job, they run a basic background check on you. The Dupris do not. They just let everybody into their lives. And I was talking to my mother before I was recording this video, and I said, well, the Dupris aren't going to be happy because if I were Nicole and Danny, I would be uncomfortable being around Vanessa, because you never know. It's not like Joey has security on Vanessa. She's not walking around with guards. And what if Joey's enemies did decide to go after Joey through Vanessa, and Danny or Nicole, or Danny and Nicole, or their family members were around at the moment, and, they got hurt because of Vanessa's relationship with Joey. They were, a collateral damage, right? So I just don't understand. Like, for me, it would have been, these two women have been warning Vanessa about her safety with Joey without any concern about their own safety being around Vanessa and the possibility that she could bring danger into their lives. Anyway, but danger is in their lives because of Heather now. Right? So Vanessa loves Heather. She thinks she's funny, smart, just, worldly, all the things. Nicole says you should trust the boundary that Joey has drawn about Heather. And, and Vanessa knows that Joey's not giving her the full story about Heather, sorry. But that dingbat doesn't wonder why, or she doesn't even think, well, there must be something. Maybe she's not right in the head. Maybe there is something that I should be concerned about, that if he's not telling me the full story. Now, we know that Joey doesn't tell Vanessa the full story about a lot of things, Doug, but like, this is your life. You've got children. Vanessa, you will... You should have just stayed the dippy sidekick who was having sex with personal trainers in the closets of the country club, because this version, you just look like a fool. And I'm ready for you, along with Bill Hamilton, to be publicly humiliated. But Vanessa understands, and Vanessa should understand what she signed up for, right? She should understand, and that there could be a cost to it as far as her, her safety and her relationships, just like, how Joey could have cost her relationship with her daughter, Deanna. So, then they talk about, they have a, brief mention of Ted, and Kyle comes over to the table, and he calls Nicole his girlfriend, information that Nicole had not yet shared with Vanessa. Vanessa's happy. She talks about how she met Noah. He's a very nice man, young man. Vanessa called Noah a young man. Anyway, and he makes Deanna smile, so she's all good with it. And, Kyle says, it was the locker room chatter, so I guess we're publicly official now. And later, after Vanessa leaves, Kyle and Nicole talk about their first date that they need to have as an official couple. And he says he's going to be pragmatic and romantic, and he wants to take her to Noah's open mic night so they can stare at him and maybe embarrass him, but he also sings some love songs and they can dance and he can stare into Nicole's eyes. So she's all for it. At first she wasn't, but she's all for it. I thought this open mic night was going to happen off screen, but then when we saw the previews for this week, it is happening. It looks like a lot of the Dupris are going to be there. It looks like Noah's going to have some issues, and I think Nicole is going to call Anita to kind of rescue him. Joey is not happy over at the casino. Joey is not happy with the henchman that he has paired up with Randy. The henchman stayed in the lobby, so he doesn't have of the hotel, so he doesn't actually have eyes on Heather all the time. Joey's saying she could have been meeting with someone. That's why she's staying in town. She's meeting with someone, and you don't know who it is. But remind me again how Randy is smarter than Joey. Over at Orphe Jean's, Leslie and Eva are having breakfast, lunch, brunch. And they're talking about the scar and Ted and how Isaiah made her feel better. Eva wants Leslie to find good love in her life. Has Marcel even been around? What is Marcel? Eva has a lot of questions. What is Marcel to Leslie? Does he treat her well? Leslie's never invited Eva to have dinner with her and Marcel. So Eva doesn't have a good take on the guy, and that's in her mother's life. And Leslie's rationale is that she doesn't need validation, other people's validation, on her relationship with Marcel. And Eva says, well, I think it's because you have this delusional hope of still being with my father. Leslie does not like being called delusional. Now, remember, delusional is crazy adjacent, right? And we know that crazy is a trigger word for Leslie. I wish the show would lean in more because they tend to have some stops and starts with some starts and stops with the word crazy and Leslie, where she has a reaction, but then she just, goes on as usual. And I do think that it is something worth exploring. There is a story there, right? But, and Eva basically wants Leslie to stop wasting time on men who do nothing but bring her pain, R.E. Ted. And, does Marcel even... Eva asked all the valid questions. Does Marcel even talk about a future with Leslie? And I like that Eva cares so much about, contrary to popular belief about how I hate Eva and all the things, I love today that Eva showed real concern about Leslie and wanting better for Leslie, because she figures that if Leslie can find happiness romantically and stop pining away from Ted, which is, in Eva's eyes, never going to happen, that Leslie could move through the world a little differently and a little lighter. At least that's my take on it. And, she wants to know if Marcel talks about a future with Leslie. And Leslie, basically has shut down at this moment and says a daughter shouldn't be giving her mother relationship advice. And Eva says, well, somebody should. But again, Leslie doesn't have any friends. When Vanessa, even though I think it's wild that Vanessa would even try to befriend Leslie because of her relationship with Nicole. But even when Vanessa tries to be nice to Leslie, Leslie pushes back on it. So, but she says, that Leslie deserves better than, and Leslie is, staring at Ted and Shanice. They've met for lunch at Orphe Jean's, and, she's visibly upset, mad, annoyed that Ted and Shanice are being, PDA at Orphe Jean's in front of her. Ted does come over to the table before he meets with Shanice and says hi to Eva and Leslie. Leslie tries to be all lovey-dovey with him, and Ted is very cold. He talks to Eva about the scar, whether or not she's given any more thought to the therapist. She says she's not going to see a therapist right now. She's not spiraling anymore. She's not in her head anymore, so she's going to hold off. That was the shortest story. I really think they could have done something with this story where, and especially because as much as I don't want to see a love triangle between Kat, Eva, and Isaiah, they could have done something where Eva was being distant with Isaiah, pushing him away, not being physical with him, and not communicating why. And by creating this distance with Isaiah, then he moves into this kind of friendship with Kat, and it becomes the parallel of the Eva-Tomas relationship where Isaiah is sharing his frustrations with his relationship with Eva, with Kat. And then it would give Eva, not that anything should physically happen between Isaiah and Kat, but it would give Eva another glimpse, and maybe open her eyes a little bit more to what Kat was going through and feeling with Eva and Tomas's friendship, and how, and what it ultimately led to, right? And how would she feel if that friendship between Kat and Isaiah, where Isaiah is, talking to Kat in such an intimate way about intimate things, could that lead to them becoming intimate, and how she would feel if that were to happen? I think that was a really big missed opportunity. But anyway, Ted is like super cold towards Leslie. He tells them that he's meeting Shanice for lunch, and he goes on about his day. Bill and Hayley are at the hospital. Bill wants to go home. Listen, if they let Bill out of the hospital and he goes home again and he ends up with another cardiac event, just keep it. Just throw him in a casket and put him in the ground, because I'm just tired of Bill and these events and the hospital and him signing himself out of the hospital and all the things. So Hayley gets in bed with Bill and they're cuddling. He wants to have sex. Shanice walks in. She kicks Hayley out of the bed. She tells him that, you can't be having sex. You just had cardiac arrest. And Hayley sees that as her new opportunity to kill Bill. She's like, oh, I'll just fuck him to death. Right? So Shanice leaves, and Bill wants to stress test the pacemaker, because his rationale is they put a pacemaker in. So that fixed my heart. That fixed the issue. So let's have sex. So Hayley gets under the covers with him. And over at the nurse's station, Ashley signs on to duty. Shanice gives her an update about Bill and Hayley. And then after Shanice gets on the elevator to leave, Bill's monitors start going off. Ashley goes into room, finds Bill and Hayley in bed together, tells Hayley to get out. Get out of the bed, cut it out. Bill says he's going home. Ashley says, you're not cleared to go home. You need a doctor to clear you to go home. Ashley and Hayley get into it verbally. Hayley threatens to, and listen, I liked Ashley today. Ashley was like, I have a job, something you have never really done. And Hayley was like, you will not speak to me that way, and I will report you to your supervisor. And Ashley's like, oh, okay. She goes and picks up the phone and she's like, I need you to come in here. Now, I was like, is she calling Shanice? Because Shanice would be Ashley's supervisor. And I was like, is she calling Dr. Monica? But she actually called security to have Hayley escorted out of the hospital. That was such a boss move. I loved it. And this was at the end of the show. Hayley says to Ashley, I will be with Bill until his last breath. And it was a great tag for the end of the episode. But hey, Beyond the Gates, because I felt like, I'm like, are we hitting a wall again with the Kill Bill story? But maybe, it's good that we're questioning whether, we're hitting the wall or not, because it's going to keep us tuning in. I just want more movement, because this story has got to climax at some point. Martin and Smitty get home. The kids aren't there. They start cuddling. Martin wants to take a trip. He wants to go to this clothing optional beach in Costa Rica. Martin, are you becoming interesting? And Smitty's like, well, with the election so close, would you want to chance it? And Martin said, we could buy out the whole beach and be naked together. Martin Richardson, are you trying to call me a liar because I said you're not interesting and now you're trying to be interesting? But Smitty's like, you've got the election. I've got no time to get away. Martin's not letting it go. He really wants to do this. He really wants to go away with Smitty alone. he's like, we can wait until after we move Tyrell into the dorms and we do the tailgate, but we should get away. Smitty says, I can't leave town. I have unfinished business. It's about the red market. They're hurting people in different cities. Smitty, you're not in those different cities. Like, I just don't understand what Smitty and Jacob think they can do. I just am perplexed by what they think they're able to do. But he needs to expose the whole truth, and he won't stop until the Impaler is unmasked. Now, this is interesting only in that, as much as I don't care about this Impaler story going forward, but it does create the opportunity to put Smitty and possibly Martin both in some jeopardy, which would be good. And we can see how lethal Heather, I almost called her Leah, how lethal Heather really is. I still contend that they could be barreling towards a Who Killed Heather storyline once she's unmasked as the Impaler, and she'll probably do some other dastardly things. So we might not get that until like February if they do, if they do it. It's not going to happen I don't think this fall, but I do think we could be getting that. So we'll see. Nicole and Ted do run into each other at the country club. They talk about a basketball game. Ted brings up Kyle and Carlton. I, again, feel like he was being very condescending, judgmental. Like, I knew you wouldn't want to be, playing the field forever. Just like, ugh. But he walks away, and Nicole is just like, that's right. I am that girl. She is so comfortable. And that's why I keep screaming and advocating for Daphne to have an actual story that she drives, because she's so beautiful and smart and talented, both Daphne and Nicole. And Nicole is so comfortable in her skin and her confidence, right? And Daphne knows who Nicole is. When we talk about Ted, knowing who Ted is, when we talk about Keith, knowing who Ted is as a character. And the same is true for Nicole. Daphne took Nicole through a transformation where she was, more of this uptight, perfect wife, Stepford, doctor type character. And then she became this, fun, naughty, non-monogamous, fly by the seat of her pants type of woman who just wanted to have fun, non-committal in a relationship. And now she's managing to merge the two, and she's doing it brilliantly. Let her drive a story, please. Vanessa ends up over at the casino. She talks about how Nicole is with Kyle. Joey's uninterested. Vanessa wants to know why Heather is so awful. Joey wants her to stop questioning him about Heather. She's better off not knowing. Again, dippy Vanessa doesn't realize that there's a reason Joey's not telling her something, that this woman is probably dangerous. That she wanted to take over her father's family business. That she wanted to merge businesses with Joey. So you have to, if you have a brain in your head, that this woman is possibly very dangerous. And that's why Joey isn't telling you everything, because he doesn't want you to get hurt by having that information. Anyway, Vanessa in this conversation isn't giving up, and Joey says some things have to be kept private, and if that's a deal breaker, let me know now. But Vanessa ultimately says it's not worth ending what we have. I would be miserable without you. Joey says he would be miserable without her. Guys, this is not a love story. I know Vanessa is blind to what Joey did to Doug, even though deep down she probably does know. But this is not a love story. I think they think it's a love story. This is not a love story. But Vanessa ultimately agrees to no more questions about Heather. And then they have some casino sex. And then, Ted and Shanice, just, as a throwaway, they had Ted and Shanice talking about Bill and Hayley in bed together. Ted kind of defending Bill because birds of a feather. Then Ted wants to meet Shanice's brothers. Shanice is like, my brothers will tear you apart. You don't want to walk into that. But Ted, again, is being cocky. He says he'll win them over. Listen, if you're going to do this beyond the gates, I want to see it. I want to see Leslie's brothers eat Ted alive, and I don't want them to do the switch up like Dr. Monica did. I want Ted to leave that house or restaurant or wherever they are, with his tail between his legs, feeling like the little man that he is. Anyway, not a bad episode. It feels like they're playing some story beats that will hopefully build to some bigger story, some interesting developments. But please, let's move the Kill Bill story along.